All right, you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one. Not that one, but this one. So check it out, you guys. I got another banger for you. This one right here is called Big Hazard Imposes Its Will. I want to get this one out as soon as possible before the weekend. So without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into it. So anyways, this story starts out sometime around May 14th of 2014 when members of the Big Hazard gang decided to throw one of its traditional barbecues to commemorate its weekly family functions and just to continue embracing the family dynamic or the family concept that Big Hazard has always been known for. This is another one of Southern California's dominant Sureño street gangs that you guys have heard me talk a lot about. And it's also another street gang, one of many, that has strong symbiotic ties to the Mexican Mafia. So Big Hazard, also known as Hazard Grande, is a gang that initially originated as far back as the 1940s in Boyle Heights, a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood in the city of Los Angeles. You know, I don't think anyone will disagree that it's been well established throughout the years that Big Hazard's stomping grounds has always been the Ramona Gardens, an impoverished low-income housing development or low-income housing projects that were built during World War II. Construction began sometime around February or March of 1940 with the groundbreaking ceremony on March 16th of 1940 that was attended by then Governor Colbert Olson. So from all the research that I've done and everything that I've been able to gather, the Ramona Gardens demographics have always been about 95% of its residents being identified as being Hispanic and about 5% of its residents being identified as being African American. However, in 2014, the demographics for African Americans fell somewhere close to 3% after a racially motivated firebombing drove most of the African Americans out of this housing development. You know, the unfortunate thing about this is that it's the minorities that experience this kind of discord when living in communities like the Ramona Gardens. Instead of banding together and realizing there's a common enemy and a better fight out there, they turn on each other. I have my own opinion about this, but that's not what this story is about. It's a shame that it happens like that, but it is what it is. Anyways, on May 11, 2014, which fell on a Mother's Day, 8 members from the Big Hazard gang decided to take the escalating racial tensions a step further. So in an organized, coordinated effort, these 8 individuals collectively planned this firebombing out for the specific purpose of driving the African American families out of the Ramona Gardens housing projects. Allegedly, it was said that Jose Salcido, Little Mo, Edwin Felix, Boogie, Jonathan Portillo, Pelon, Francisco Farias, Bones, Joel Menares, Gallo, Jose Zamora, Fresco, Carlos Hernandez, Ryder, and Jose Garbe, Malo, targeted 4 apartments that night. So knowing that the apartment complex was equipped with video surveillance cameras, they all left their own apartments indiscriminately and assembled somewhere outside of the complex's perimeters. So according to court documents and police reports, each one of these guys was given a specific role in these attacks, and each one was provided with items to be used. Items that included masks to conceal their identities, hammers to break the windows, an accelerant, rags to be lit, and empty bottles that would serve as Molotov cocktails. So once they assembled outside of the complex, they put their mask on, they went over their designated roles, and then they re-entered the complex. And they did this so that the surveillance cameras would lead investigators to believe that the attacks came from somewhere outside of the complex. Then they smashed the windows of the 4 targeted apartments to gain access and to also create maximum damage with the firebombs. So one of them would run up, break the window, then the next guy would come up holding the Molotov cocktail, while the guy in charge of lighting them would run up, light them, and then hand them to the next guy who was in charge of throwing them through the window. And then the guy responsible for throwing the lit cocktails into the dwellings would throw it in as far as he could in hopes of setting fire to any possible escape routes. These guys didn't want any survivors. They wanted bodies. So the alleged ringleader, Little Mo, was said to have played a primary role in directing the others and by supervising the operation as it played out. Furthermore, it was also said that Little Mo assigned each one of these other 7 individuals with a specific role that included lighting each Molotov cocktail, throwing the lit cocktail into the dwelling, and then watching for any potential interference. So it was only after federal investigators got several confidential tips that they then went to the video footage and used that footage to match the gait to these 8 individuals that they thought were involved. So what I mean by gait is the way that somebody walks, their mannerisms, the way that they move. Let's just say that they have somebody committing a crime on video and they have a mask on. They can watch that footage and make a determination as to whether or not they might be able to identify that individual, either by the way he moves, whether he's left-handed or right-handed, if he has a limp, if he walks on the tips of his toes. There's different characteristics that they look at that might tend to identify someone. And that's what they did with these 8 individuals. You got to remember, these guys all had masks on. So they looked at the way that they walked, the way that they moved, whether or not they limped, and all that good stuff. So based on the confidential information that they received and the video footage where they identified these 8 individuals based on their gait, they used that to make the arrest. So they make the arrest and they charge these guys with a litany of federal charges that included civil rights violations and hate crimes. You know, it's now been over 20 years since these fire bombings rocked the LA community. And it's been said that while racial tensions do still exist on some level in the Ramona Gardens housing projects, they're not as prevalent as before, and the community has become a lot more diverse in the recent years. So the other thing that Big Hazard has become well known for is some of the brutal shootouts that it's been involved in and some of the attempted murders on local law enforcement. Some might even say that Big Hazard became a lot more aggressive after the death of a well-known member named Mauricio Cornejo. So according to everything I've been able to gather, in 2007, Mauricio went into cardiac arrest and died while being detained in a holding cell at the Hollenbeck police station. Other inmates who were there at the time claimed that they witnessed a handcuffed Mauricio being severely beaten with batons by several officers who repeatedly hit him. You know, I personally believe that Big Hazard's disdain for law enforcement was deeply rooted long before this incident that took place with Mauricio, and that this only intensified their hatred for bad cops. But I guess it all comes down to who you ask and what you believe. So as I mentioned in my last story about the Southside Montebello gang, Big Hazard is also another street gang that has strong ties with the Mexican Mafia. And this is based on the fact that some of its members have been inducted into the organization and continue to assert their influence over the gang. Jose Gonzalez, Joker, Danny Pina, Danny Boy, and Manuel Jackson, Cricket, were just a few who I named. You know, another Big Hazard gang member who got a lot of recognition and exposure during one of the Mexican Mafia's biggest federal indictments was David Gallardo, Smaleon, who was also from Big Hazard. Smaleon wasn't considered to be the type of guy who had leadership qualities. He was more of an enforcer, and he put a lot of work in the Ramona Gardens. However, long before any of these other guys were inducted into the Mexican Mafia, Robert Salas, Robot, was another Big Hazard gang member who was actually considered to be one of the godfathers of the gang. Robot's history goes all the way back to the beginnings of what's been known as the Boot War. Another Mexican Mafia leader who became part of the 3-man federal commission was Adolf Reynoso, Champ, who was also from the Big Hazard gang. So now that I blew through a little bit of the history, again, this story starts out on May 14th, 2014, on Mother's Day, at a barbecue that was being attended by Big Hazard gang members and their families. And again, like I said, aside from embracing the traditional family concept that Big Hazard has always been known for, they were also celebrating Mother's Day for all the mothers who were associated with the gang. So for the purpose of this story, the barbecue was thrown at one of the local parks in Boyle Heights called Hazard Recreation Center, or betterly known as Hazard Park. You know, it's a good-sized park that has an open field, a dog run, a small playground for the kids, and a lot of picnic tables that makes it ideal for barbecuing. This park, as well as Salazar Park, that's also located in Boyle Heights, are two of the favorite parks that were frequently used to throw these types of functions. So on the day of the barbecue, some of the first Hazard gang members that started to arrive got there sometime around 11 or 11:30. And since they were the first ones there, they started setting everything up. And they expected anywhere from 75 to 100 people to show up, which was the norm for a barbecue like this. The first thing they did when they got there is they laid claim to 3 tables and they started setting everything up. They brought tables, chairs, tablecloths to put the food on, about a half dozen coolers that were full of beer and sodas for the kids. And of course, they had carne asada, carnitas, pulled pork, pollo, hot dogs, hamburgers. Then the tables were lined with trays of food that you normally see at a good barbecue. Rice, beans, chili, mac and cheese, potato salad, etc., etc. You know, when it came to food, like most raza, the Hazard gang, they brought their A game. Then someone brought one of them old school boom boxes. For those of you that were around in the 80s, I know you guys remember those. The bigger the speakers, the louder the radio, the cooler you were. And you know, a barbecue ain't a real barbecue unless you got some good oldies playing. You know, so for the most part, the vibes were good that day and everybody was having a good time. So as more people started to show up for this gathering, an individual by the name of Robert Hernandez and his brother Jesus showed up. So for the purpose of this story, I'll now refer to Robert as Sinner and Jesus as Sly. Both of these guys were well-known Big Hazard gang members who always showed up for these types of functions. But on this day, they probably should have sat this one out. Because prior to this barbecue, Sly had gotten into it with another Big Hazard gang member named Robert Gonzalez, who I'll now refer to as Grumpy. And Grumpy was considered to be one of the shot callers for the gang. Apparently, Sly and Grumpy had gotten into it a few days before this barbecue behind Grumpy spray painting graffiti on a wall of someone's house who Sly considered to be family. You know, I'm not sure if Grumpy knew this before he decided to strike up that wall, but it led to a confrontation either way. Sly apparently told Grumpy not to strike that particular wall up because the people that lived there at that house were like family to him. Grumpy obviously didn't like the way Sly came at him, so he continued to spray paint the wall and completely disregarded everything Sly had said. So these two end up exchanging words and they said whatever they said to each other. From there, it continues to escalate and then it goes all bad. You know, there's no doubt about the fact that Grumpy probably felt a sense of entitlement based on his status as one of the gang's leaders. He probably didn't like to be told what to do by someone like Sly, and he probably felt disrespected by the way Sly came at him. So after they exchange insults and threaten each other, Sly pulls a gun out and shoots Grumpy several times. You know, what I couldn't understand when I first heard this story is why Sly felt like he wasn't going to draw any heat from this. And this was clear by the fact that he showed up for this barbecue. You know, either that or he was just a ballsy dude that thought he could justify it. But unfortunately for Sly, he was completely unaware of the fact that Big Hazard's leadership was highly upset with him and that they had already sanctioned a green light on him. You know, I've covered this in some of my other stories, but Big Hazard is one of those street gangs that's been so deeply rooted with the Mexican Mafia that some of their policies and protocols were adopted directly from some of the Mexican Mafia's concepts, meaning they operate in a similar fashion. You know, one of their standing policies is that you can't just whack another member of the gang without just cause or proper authorization from the gang's leadership. And Sly knew this, but he obviously felt justified in taking Grumpy out. And in case I didn't make that clear, he didn't just shoot Grumpy, he actually took him out. So another one of Big Hazard's standing policies is that any member who fails to carry out a green light is subject to discipline for failing to follow orders. So when Sly and his brother Sinner pulled up to the barbecue, there was immediate tension. Sly didn't feel it, but Sinner knew that there was something wrong. His homeboys weren't being as social as they normally were, and he could just tell that something was different. You know, at one point, Sinner even tried to warn Sly that something was wrong and that he needed to be careful. But Sly brushed it off as just another one of Sinner's feeble bouts with unnecessary paranoia. So as more Big Hazard gang members and their families started showing up for the barbecue, eventually Anthony Rivas, who I'll now refer to as Flaco, and Christian Almanza, who I'll now refer to as Tigre, also showed up. And both of these guys had solid reputations. They were both diehard Big Hazard up-and-comings who had already proven their loyalty to the gang on many different occasions. But today, at this barbecue, Tigre would set in motion a chain of events that would not only demonstrate his willingness to make an ultimate sacrifice, but a sacrifice that would also change the rest of his life forever. So after greeting everyone at the barbecue, making their rounds, and paying respects to all the families and their homeboys, Tigre scanned all the faces of the crowd, making a quick mental note of who was there and who wasn't. Two faces that he instantly recognized were Sly and his brother Sinner. So Flaco and Tigre, they both knew that something was up with Sly, that he was in hot water for something, but to what extent, they didn't know. But one thing was for sure, they were definitely going to find out. So by this time, it was already close to 1:30, 2 o'clock, and most of the people that were going to attend this barbecue had already shown up. And everybody had pretty much taken up seats in different areas closer to the people that they were tighter with. All the gang members had congregated on one side of the function, while all the family members kind of sat together on the other side. Meanwhile, Tigre was trying to figure out a way to separate Sly from this function so that he could find out what was up with his status. Tigre wanted to put a call out and get a definitive answer, but first he had to figure a way to get Sly to leave. And this was the type of loyalty that set Tigre apart from some of the other Big Hazard gang members. He didn't have to take the initiative to reach out to anyone for the purpose of finding out Sly's status. But he did this because he believed in his hood and he was a loyal dude. A lot of individuals wouldn't have touched that, especially knowing that there was a good chance that they might have been the one told to do something to Sly if that's what needed to be done. But Tigre, he didn't think twice about it. He wanted to know Sly's status, and if something needed to be done, he was willing to do it himself. So as a means to lure Sly away from the barbecue, Tigre asked him if he could make a quick beer run to get a 12-pack of Modelo down the street at the Soto liquor store in East Los Angeles. This particular liquor store is about 3 blocks away from the Ramona Gardens housing projects. It's a famous liquor store that everybody goes to. So after Sly agrees to go, Tigre gives him the money and then he leaves. So as soon as Sly left, Tigre jumped on his cell phone and tried calling Victor Barrios, another Big Hazard gang member who they call Grizzly. Grizzly was one of Big Hazard's leaders on the streets who had a lot of influence within the gang. He was also a direct link with some of the incarcerated Imeros like Joker, Danny Boy, and Cricket. You know, it's probably safe to assume that some of the leaders of Big Hazard who are on the streets, guys like Grizzly, are probably given a lot of latitude to make some of the day-to-day decisions. You know, not only that, but guys like Joker, Danny Boy, and Cricket probably have no interest in being bothered with the day-to-day trivial matters that Grizzly should be able to handle himself. But at the same time, given this level of latitude, I'm sure that some of the bigger decisions that involve sanctioning green lights, street tax business, monetary investments, and other things that directly involve the gang as a collective. So when Tigre placed a call out to Grizzly, he got no answer. It kept going to his voicemail. He called him 3 or 4 times, but every time he called, it just went straight to the voicemail. But this was no cause for concern. In fact, a lot of the time when he called Grizzly, he'd usually be out in the field busy, either collecting money or handling business. But he'd always be good to call him back within 5 minutes. And that's exactly what happened. After he called Grizzly a number of times and he kept getting his voicemail, he waited and Grizzly eventually called him back. So when Tigre gets Grizzly on the phone, he cuts straight to the chase. He's like, look, I'm here at the barbecue and Sly and his brother Sinner are here. What do you want me to do? So before Grizzly can respond, Tigre, he presses him further. He's like, hey, what's up with this dude? Is he good? Is he in trouble? What's up? Let me know. What you want me to do? So Grizzly then tells Tigre that Sly's been green lighted by the big homies, that he's in trouble, that it's behind the situation that happened with Grumpy, and that furthermore, this green light also extends to Sly's family as well. You know, Grizzly never stipulated who this meant, but this sounded more like a situation where they wanted to hit Sly, but that if he wasn't accessible, that they'd either hit his brother or somebody else in his family. So at one point, Tigre advises Grizzly that he'll take care of it himself personally and that he just sent Sly to the liquor store to draw him away from that function. With that, Grizzly tells Tigre to be careful and to keep him in the loop insofar as what happens. So as soon as Tigre hung up the phone, he filled Flaco in on the details and told him that they needed to leave so that they could catch Sly somewhere by himself by the liquor store. That it had to be somewhere away from the barbecue. Flaco was another individual that was considered to be solid from Big Hazard. He was someone else that wholeheartedly believed in his gang. This was his family now. And when Tigre asked him to come with him, he didn't think twice about it. He's like, let's go. Let's catch up with him before he comes back. So Tigre and Flaco, they both left the barbecue and they headed toward Soto Liquor Store that was located about 3 blocks down the street. So as they start driving in the direction of that store, they start brainstorming about all the possibilities, everything that could go wrong, how they were going to handle it, what they were going to do, and what they should do. Anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. If you guys liked this episode, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like this episode, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. Again, I want to extend my appreciation and gratitude to all those of you who have subscribed to this channel and those of you who have helped me reach yet another milestone, 70,000 honest subs. It's been a slow, gradual, tumultuous process, but I got here nonetheless, and I'm still trudging away. On that note there, you guys enjoy the rest of your night and keep pushing that positivity. With that being said, this is your boy B, and I'm gone.